In today's world, there's a lot of names that we refer to moms, a lot of descriptive words that talk about the things that they do for us. You may have heard a few of these: soccer mom, super mom, Wonder Woman, Mother Bear, helicopter mom. You may have heard it referred to like this: the enforcer, the nurse, the medic, the negotiator, the peacekeeper, the general. A lot of words that can be used to describe the actions of mothers. Today we want to take a special moment to recognize our moms. Today we want to remember all the things that they have done for us, the past that they have laid for us, the things that they have done, but also to reflect upon the meaning of what it means to be a mom. The modern-day holiday of Mother's Day was first celebrated in 1908 when Anna Jarvis held a memorial service for her mom, Ann Jarvis, and all the mighty acts that she did as a peace activist who cared for wounded soldiers during the Civil War, both sides of the Civil War. The memorial service that Anna held was at St. Andrew's Methodist Church in Grafton, West Virginia in 1908. She began to campaign not only for the acts of her mom, but for other moms. And eventually in 1914, as we know, President Woodrow Wilson signed a proclamation designating Mother's Day to be the second Sunday in May as a national holiday to honor moms. What is it that we remember about mothers? Is it a day to celebrate all the things that moms do for us? Is it a day to remember who they are? As in the video, what is it about today that makes a mighty mom? What are the characteristics that would make a mighty mom? All of us can think of the things that our moms have done for us, those moms that are with us, those that have passed on, those grandmothers, the lineage of moms that have been before us. And as we think about all the things that moms have done for us, all of these descriptive words, all of the, as the video said, maybe the diaper changer, or maybe the bottle washer, whatever it is, all of those things that moms have done for us, both seen and both unseen. What is it that makes a mom mighty? When we consider all the things of today's time, all that moms have done for us, I'm reminded of all the different activities that we as parents do with our kids and for our kids. All the activities. In today's time, it seems like there's more and more activities that we're involved in to make sure that our children have the best. But I just want to call your attention to the one question: what really makes a mom mighty? What is it that drives her to become that warrior, to fight for the heart of their children, to do things for their children? In today's time, we could come up with a lot of descriptive words to make a mom mighty, but I want to share with you one simple word that will last eternity, and that is faith. Faith. In all the things that we as parents, whether you're a mom or a dad or whatever our responsibility is, we can always think about the things that we do for our children, but I want to just paint this picture for us today about what makes an incredible mom mighty to the point of going to all ends of the earth to do for their children. Because you see, all the things that we do for our children today, all the things that we give them, all the successes, all the events, all the training, all the lessons, all the things that we have done, we can put all those in a box, because you know what? That box is going to stay right here on earth. But there's one thing that will last in eternity, and that is faith. We're reminded in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5, this passage where Paul is writing this letter to Timothy. And Timothy's not a man, Timothy is a teenager. And is writing this letter to encourage Timothy and who he is as the leader of the church, the one who's going to pick up the baton and continue in the fight that Paul has established. Timothy. So Paul writes this letter, and he says to Timothy in verse 5 of chapter 1 of 2 Timothy, I am reminded of your sincere faith. which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also. Paul understood and saw something in Timothy that he knew was a legacy that was passed down because of the mothers that were in his life. And this, and this was important because it helped define who Timothy is and was in the eyes of Paul. Paul noticed something in Timothy's life. And I think we all can understand the lasting impact of faith on our lives. I want to share with you two examples in God's Word this morning about mighty moms, about what has made them something special. One we haven't heard a whole lot about. The other we hear quite often. The first one is Jochebed. Some of you may be saying, well, who's that? That's the mother of Moses. If we'll look in Exodus chapter 2, it gives us the story of the birth of Moses. And we've heard this story before because we all know who Moses is. But I want to just draw attention to something that Jochebed did that had a lasting impact on Moses and therefore on how God used Moses to change the people of Israel. In Exodus chapter 2, I'm going to start reading in verse 1 to remind us of this story. Now, a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. And let me stop there and remind you of what's going on. If we remember this story, the Hebrews were under bondage under Pharaoh in Egypt. They did not have an easy life because it was a life of slavery, persecution, and very, very hard living. To the point where Pharaoh was so scared of the Hebrew people because they were growing in vast number that he said, every male child must be thrown into the Nile River. And this was coming from Pharaoh, so all those that were in authority carried out this and told all of the Hebrew midwives that were helping mothers give birth, if there was a boy, throw it in the river. And we know this story according to the writer of Exodus, and this brings us to Jochebed. She gave birth, picking up in verse 3. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it in tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. You know the rest of the story where Moses' sister followed along until Pharaoh's daughter, who went down to the Nile to bathe, noticed this, and she got the basket and realized that it was a baby. Now, that's about all that we know of this particular story, and how also that Miriam said, I will go and get a Hebrew woman to nurse this baby, who happened to be Jochebed. Now, how do we know that? Because later on in chapter 6, we get the lineage of Levi, where she is named to be a part of that lineage and the mother of Moses. So we know who Jochebed is. We don't know a whole lot about her. Now, I'm going to do something today that I'm very careful about because we don't know in writing about the faith of Jochebed. But I'm just going to infer upon my understanding of what might be happening there, because I want us to understand what made this woman special, what made this mother special to each and every one of us. It was the idea of being able to know what she did for her child. Bless you. Sorry about that, because I know when people do that, it's like, man, I'm thirsty now. But when we look at Jochebed, I want you to understand this. And again, this is just my perspective of things. It had to be a great deal of faith to be able to put your baby in a basket and let it go down the river. I bet she thought about maybe, and again, this is just my perspective of things, but I would bet that she probably went through every single option that she could think of before putting her baby in that basket. I bet she sat around and thought about every place that she could hide the baby so that they wouldn't hear this baby boy or see him running around and want to kill him. I bet that she thought about every possible scenario that she could come up with so that she could be able to be the one to protect her child, to guard her child. Because again, a mighty mother will do whatever it takes in order to save that child. I'm sure that she went through everything in her mind before she came to the point of knowing there's nothing more I can do. So can you imagine, moms, what it was like to place that baby in the basket? It must have taken a great deal of faith, because there was nothing more that she could do. And when I'm reminded of this story, my mind goes to the understanding of, well, what if she didn't do that? What if she didn't have the faith? What if she wanted to be with her child because she didn't know whether or not she was ever going to see that child again? She didn't know that God had orchestrated things in such a way that she would be able to nurse her child and see him grow and be a part of his life. She didn't know that was going to happen. So when she placed that baby there had to be a great deal of faith in knowing that this was something that she had to do because it was beyond her control of being able to save her child, to protect her child, to guard her child. You see, in my understanding, there had to be a sense of faith in knowing that Moses was going to be protected. To come to that point. Because what would happen to Moses? What would happen to us if Jochebed hadn't done that? Would Moses have gotten into the family of Pharaoh? Would Moses not have had the authority and the training that he did? Would Moses not have had that connection with Egyptian culture to know how to go back and talk with Pharaoh when he did? Would God have not used Moses in the way that he did if Jochebed hadn't have done what she did to place her baby in the basket and let it go down the river? You see, this to me is something that goes beyond just an action. This is more of a heartfelt faith that she had. Let me share with you one other in the Bible. If you turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 1, we have the familiar story of Hannah. This is one we've heard about, Hannah, who is the mother of Samuel, the great prophet. But Hannah was in a position where she could not do all that she wanted to do. In this story, and I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but let me summarize. Elkanah was her husband. He had Hannah and Peninnah, and it was an understanding that she could not bear children. She could not get pregnant. For some reason, God had closed her womb and would not allow that. And for someone who is in this position, it seemed like every year, as we know, every year in verse 6, year after year, Hannah was ridiculed by her, as the scripture puts it, her rival. We know Elkanah would do whatever he could for Hannah when they went to sacrifice annually at Shiloh, that he would give her the best food, the double portion more than what she needed, because he loved her more than Peninnah. But Peninnah was able to have children, and Peninnah was one of these where she provoked Hannah, as Scripture tells us. And you can imagine what those conversations were like. I'm sure she paraded around her children. I'm sure she reminded Hannah of all the things. And what did Hannah do in response to that? Did Hannah revolt against that? Did she go against the words of her husband? Did she say, I'm not going to worship God anymore and put myself through that? Did she post about it? We don't see anything about that from Hannah, because there was an understanding that in Hannah's actions, this is what she did. Every year when she went to worship, she prayed. Year after year when she went through this ordeal, she would pray. And this particular year, what we see is that God heard her prayer. We know this story, that as they went and she was in great anguish and weeping over this, she would pray. In fact, this particular time, the prophet Eli noticed her, that she was praying while moving her mouth, but not hearing her voice, that she was there praying to God. And this is what her prayer was in verse 10. In her deep anguish, she prayed. And she made a vow saying, Lord Almighty, in verse 11, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. And she kept praying this, and Eli heard this, thought she was drunk, thought she was out of her mind. And she said, no, I'm not. And in fact, verse 15, she says, again, I'm a woman deeply troubled. And this is what my prayer is. And Eli says in verse 17, go in peace. And may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. And she said, may your servant find favor in your eyes. And then she went away and ate something, and she was revived. And we know the rest of the story, that she was able to conceive and give birth. And she was faithful in what she did in bringing Samuel back. And the amazing thing about Hannah's story is that what gets me, much like Jochebed didn't have any other way to save her son. So she put him in a basket and went on. Hannah, in her great anguish for a son, prayed and said, if you will give me a son, then I will give that son back to you to be used by you. In both instances, these mothers gave up the very thing that was precious to them. Because you see, in the culture, if you didn't have children, you were nothing. It wasn't the status, it wasn't the job, it wasn't how good a wife that you were. If you did not have children, you were considered cursed and nothing in the eyes of culture. And so you can imagine, in both of these instances, giving of your son, your child, away was an incredible step. But what makes a mighty mom today? Is it all that we can do for our children? Or is it something that's going to last eternally? You see, I believe that what made these moms specials is their faith. Their faith drove them to an action, not necessarily a desire. You see, in both instances, they could have done something on their own. They could have tried to their very last ability and power and strength to do, but they could not do. Hannah could have revolted against God and not stopped worship, but yet she continued to worship, continued to go, continued to pray in her faith. And this is how I know that her faith was so strong to her, because if we read in chapter 2 of 1 Samuel, we get that famous prayer of Hannah. And here's something that I want us to understand, because you and I live in a culture, whether we're a mom or a dad, where we want to do whatever for our children. We want our children to be able to have a better life than we did. So we will do whatever it takes, even to the point of too much. Before we realize that what's most important for our children is not what they have on this earth, but it's the eternal significance. You see, Hannah didn't say, look what God did for me. Hannah didn't say, look at what I'm able to do with my son. Hannah didn't pray and say, look everybody, what blessing this is. I want you to hear what Hannah focused upon. My heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord my horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Now, in this beginning of the prayer, Hannah did not one time bring the focus upon herself. Everything was about who God is and who God was to her. Her rock, her deliverer, the one who is. You see, in all of our faith, one of the most important things that we can do in our life is live that faith in such a way that people see a difference. The Apostle Paul saw something in Timothy, and that was his faith, because it was established there by his mother and his grandmother. There was a lineage of faith that made him who he was. In Moses, we saw that God was able to use him. Why? Because his mother gave him up and put him in a basket down a river to save his life so that God would be able to use him. Hannah, in all of her anguish, did not give up, but continued to pray to God, having faith, knowing that God would provide regardless of what was going to happen. And when that happened, she worshiped the Lord continually, because that's what she was doing before. She didn't change after. You see, one of the things that we have to understand that makes us mighty, whether we're a mother, a dad, a child, it doesn't matter, is our faith. Why? Because that is eternal. Everything that we do for our children today will fade away. Everything that we're able to accomplish today will come to an end. Everything that we're able to do will tarnish, except that one thing that is eternal, and that is faith. We're told in Psalms chapter 127, verse 3, children are a heritage from the Lord. What does that really mean, heritage? Does that mean that, children are a responsibility that you're supposed to do whatever you need to for their betterment? No, children are a heritage. What is this heritage? Does that mean that they're just something that I have so that I can pour my life into? A heritage. A heritage is something that is passed down, continued throughout all generations. That's the heritage that we're talking about. And when we say children are a heritage from us, no, from the Lord, then what you and I have to understand is there is a great deal of significance, not in what our children are able to do, but who they are. And who they are is tied to the eternal significance of what God has created each of them to be. So we as parents have to understand that there's a bigger picture here. Just like in the faith of these mighty women, we have to have faith in our life so that our children can see that, so that they will continue in the heritage of what God has planned for each and every one of them. And it's not because of what I can do for my children, it's in who I am, faithfully worshiping God, and my children see that. That would be a question for each of us today. What do our children really see in us? Not how successful we are, not for what we're able to do, not for the skills and the abilities that we have, not for the knowledge that we have, but I'm talking about something that will last an eternity, something that won't tarnish or fade, something that won't crumble away with time, something that won't become useless because of our deterioration, but an eternal significance in our lives. We're reminded in James chapter 2, verse 14, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can faith save them? You see, faith is not so much what I believe, because a lot of people believe that there's a God, but that doesn't mean that they are saved and going to be able to experience God through a personal relationship of Jesus Christ. Some people say they even believe in who Jesus is, but they won't accept Jesus, giving their life, accepting what He did on the cross, and inviting Jesus to come into their life. Because why? When you accept Jesus, you have the Spirit of God. But let me tell you, if you're not living in faith by that Spirit of God, then there is, according to Scripture, no faith. So what makes these women that we read about mighty? It's because of their faith drove them to action. Something that is, for some of us, not able to comprehend, giving of our children away. That's a very hard thing to do when you ask anybody. But yet it was an act of faith, understanding who God is and what God wanted to do. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 17, verse 20, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. How can it be that I'm going to try to do everything that I can within my own strength and my own power? And for you moms, how is it that you can do everything possible within your power, and yet there's more that you and I can do through our faith in God than we could ever do in our abilities here on earth? What you and I have to understand, especially since we're talking about moms today. Moms, what makes you mighty? Faith as small as a mustard seed, the smallest known seed. Something so small that can grow and touch such a mighty tree. To be able to know that if that little faith can do incredible things, why am I not investing in that faith so that my children will have that heritage? Faith is the most important treasure that you and I can pass on to our children. So here's a question that I want to leave with you today. What is going to be eternally significant for your children? Moms, I told the early service, my mom taught me a lot. She taught me things about cooking, because she said my boys will know how to cook. She taught me how to properly clean a toilet. You don't just flush. There's more to it than that. My mom taught me about love, forgiveness, all of those kind of things. But my mom also taught me about faith, because I saw her read her Bible. I saw her study her lesson. I saw her teach others. I saw her live that out. I saw the things that she did. It wasn't just all these things that she taught me. There was something more. And I'm not going to put my mom on a pedestal, because I don't think any of us can really do that, because we're all human. But I think what makes moms mighty is not what they do for their children, but it's the faith that drives them to do those things. You see, we're reminded in Deuteronomy of this great teaching. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. This is a commandment from God that all that He has given us, we are to impress. We are to put our mark. We're to leave the heritage for our children with our faith. Now, I'm going to be a little realistic here and say that not everybody's had that experience of a mighty mom in faith. Not everybody has done the right thing in teaching our children. Not everybody here, regardless if you're a mom or not, all of us fall short of this idea of living out our faith because we constantly battle with the sinful nature within us. But here's the question that I want to ask you today. What are you going to do today to live your faith to impact and impress upon other people? Regardless of what happens in the past, regardless of what happened yesterday, what are you going to do today to make a significant, eternal impact upon your children and those around you? Not just your children, but let's talk about your co-workers. Let's talk about your neighbors. Let's talk about your classmates. Let's talk about those friends that you know. What are you going to do today to show a mighty faith? Because your mighty faith shows a mighty God. A lot of times when we don't have faith, it's because we don't really believe that God is who He is. Oh, God is mighty. Really? He's mighty enough for Jochebed to trust putting her son in a basket and pushing him into the river. God is big enough and faithful enough that even through the consistency of prayer, Hannah was going to pray and say, okay, she didn't know that she was going to become pregnant when she realized the prophet Eli said, you go in peace. God's going to bless you. Through that faith, she said, okay, I'm going to stop my weeping. I'm going to eat, and I'm going to continue to live. Then she went back home and conceived and became pregnant, and the promise was fulfilled. You see, an amazing thing for each and every one of us is to determine today, am I going to live in such a way to impact those around me? How can I do that? First of all, we have to come to an understanding of what Jesus has done for us to know that it's not within ourselves. You cannot do everything for your children. Moms, as much as you love and want to nurture, you're not always going to be able to put a Band-Aid on every hurt. But the amazing thing about it is, Jesus died and paid the price so that He could give everything to my children. And if I place my faith in Him, in Jesus Christ, and if I live my life in Him, Jesus Christ, and if I live in faith in Jesus Christ, then they will see Jesus Christ and be able to live with the understanding that He can do all things through us. So we first have to come to that understanding of who Jesus is and ask Him to come into our lives. Then we begin to live. Let me close with this passage, Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 through 23. Very familiar to us, but it says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control." All of these characteristics are from the Spirit of God. Now, let me ask you this. Who is it that doesn't want their child to understand love? Not the fake love, but the love of God. Who is it does not want their child to understand the peace that comes from God, knowing that no matter what happens in circumstance and life, that God can bring such a peace into our life? Who is it here does not want their child to understand what it is to live in kindness and gentleness and self-control, not to explode when things happen? How many of us want that for our own life? It's not going to happen unless it's produced by the Spirit of God. And that's not going to happen until we meet Jesus. One of the amazing things about these moms and other moms in the Bible is that no matter what they felt like they could do, it wasn't enough until their faith became mighty. And they became mighty moms. How are you passing on your faith to your children? How are you living out your faith so that others can see? Are you making an eternal significance in someone's life? Or are you just living to succeed? Let's pray.